June 10th,
Yeah.
2024, 11:30 Eastern Time, 10:30 Central, 9:30 Mountain, and 8:30 Pacific Time. This is AMCC's weekly national call every non-holiday Monday. My name is Matt Bogosian. I'm the Executive Director of AMCC. And you have David Van Sickland here, our Operations Director, and lots of regional, national ecosystem leaders in manufacturing working together to strengthen the American manufacturing cornerstone of the economy, the American project. So you all know, most of you know, this AMCC is a national nonprofit designated by the federal government as the nation's manufacturing community of practice, which means we continue doing the good hard work we've been doing for 10 years, being an open source, free group of regional leaders volunteering to, work together, public, private, nonprofit orgs, finding common cause to strengthen the American economy, starting with manufacturing as the cornerstone. Last week, we convened this call from Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the Economic Growth Institute at the University of Michigan. It was great. Ashley Breitner leading the way there, and so many good public and private partners, and many manufacturers that we had at those meetings. So it was very cool. The Economic Growth Institute, if you don't know them, they're really, dedicated to, what we're doing, improving evidence-based policymaking tools and tactics, putting them in the hands of regional leaders like you. And yeah, it's complex work, but we're not intimidated by the challenge. We all have a humble and yet meaningful role in leading systems change towards sustainable development, and starting with manufacturing, back to the IMCP initiative. That's what the president then was focused on, the important ripple effect. It's really a bipartisan effort. We've seen in bipartisan legislation to accelerate the pace of progress from manufacturing outward. And we identify six key industries in manufacturing as essential, tethered to the White House 2021 supply chain reports that came out saying how critical it is in those six areas: defense, energy, transportation, agriculture, IT, and health. And so that's a useful framing lens we use, as is the big six, what we call the big six elements of what makes a regional manufacturing community thrive, which is, of course, workforce, which we hear a lot about, but it's also supply chain and infrastructure, and innovation and entrepreneurship and trade and operational improvement and capital access. So we've got to do it all, which is daunting. We only, each of us, most of us just occupy one of those sub-silos, but we got to be experts in our silo and yet work together across silos, both subject matter wise and geographically. And we're on the way to doing that. That's the good news. We met last week with one of the DoD's newer defense manufacturing communities, right? We have all of these federal agency designation programs. DoD's got one, designating the Michigan region there to work on advanced energy storage and battery manufacturing. So we met with them. And so, like all regional manufacturing related consortia that join the AMCC fold on these calls, please welcome them to AMCC, share your best practices, and vice versa. Please put your name and affiliation in chat right now. So let's take a moment to do it and use the chat. I mean, I know a lot of you guys do use the chat, but not enough. Use the chat to share information, events, best practices that are happening in your neck of the woods, in your subject matter area, and your geographic area. It's not going to happen on its own, folks, and so please jump in there and do that. So for those newer to these calls, we do two things on these calls. One is, like every week for sure, we highlight things that are in the AMCC update. And the AMCC update is this national newsletter that goes out with the help of you guys, because you send us articles and information. and David Van Sicklen, our operations director, really you know, armed, has the laboring oar in putting together a draft of this, but much of it is based on good information that's coming from you guys. So please keep that coming. And this call, this 30-minute call, really goes hand in hand with that AMCC update newsletter that goes out. There's lots of information out there. We curate it around the three lenses that we're talking about, right? The priority American manufacturing industries that are going to help us lead the 21st century. Number one. Number two, the lens of the big six about how regions can rise and thrive. And number three, what are we shooting for? Sustainable development, right? So economic jobs and all of that for sure, but also DEIA, environmental sustainability, and national security, the four component parts of sustainable development. So we're going to do that. We're going to highlight a few things in the AMCC update today, but then also on most days, most Mondays, we also have somebody to come on to a regional or national stakeholder who's important to strengthen manufacturing to come on and share a bit of their expertise on what we think is a critical component part. And so today we have a special guest from the Department of Treasury, official there, Senior Advisor Rachel McCleary. So I'm going to introduce her in a second. But first, I'm going to highlight a couple of AMCC updates. I hope everybody's putting their name and affiliation in chat and dropping some meaningful information in the chat that other folks can share. I know David is watching it. I'm going to keep my eyes peeled as much as I can, but I got a lot of stuff going on here. So, so David, thanks for stopping me if somebody's got a question or wants to chime in. So in the AMCC update that went out, lots in there. So major thanks. I see Katie Stanton from the Urban Manufacturing Alliance on the call. Her and her team, fantastic events in Detroit. The Century Foundation, Michelle Burris and team, Detroit convenings. These folks are really creating a movement around DEIA and manufacturing. If you don't know Katie, Urban Manufacturing Alliance, or Michelle Burris and the Century Foundation, you really ought to. We have some information from those convenings in Detroit. We can do this from the bottom up, and it's really in diverse communities with our great diverse workforce. There's manufacturing's got so many fat opportunities. That's PHAT. I mean, we've talked about the silver tsunami, right? With all of these, you have roughly 250,000 manufacturers in the United States, and most of them are owned by old white men, and we need to transition those companies into the next generation of leadership. And so there's a lot of opportunities to do that and much more. So anyway, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Michelle, for your hosting those convenings and including AMCC in those activities. In the AMCC update, there's a new report by Brookings. So David will drop that in the chat. Check this out. I mean, this is a lot as a result of the good hard work you guys have been doing over a decade. It's called Seizing the Moment for Place-Based Initiatives by one of our BFFs and others there at Brookings, Mark Murrow. So check that out. And then we have a couple of events David can put in the chat from our friends at Jobs for the Future, JFF. Becky Caldwell, who's on this call and is often on these calls. JFF is the community of practice, EDA's community of practice for the Good Jobs Challenge, and one of our sister EDA communities of practice. And Nate Humphreys at JFF has also traveled with us on some AMCC roadshows. And so we're working with Becky and JFF to try to model how aligned groups can collaborate together. So please feel free to reach out to Becky. She's a wealth of information and can help you navigate where it's appropriate. Thanks always, Becky, for being a good teammate, and Nate and the whole JFF crew there. In the AMCC update, we have a new podcast. We have this Manufacturing in American Century podcast. So that just drops. It's great. We have Dr. Courtney Taylor, Executive Director of Accelerate Mississippi. We had a roadshow down there throughout Mississippi, and they have a very cool statewide workforce ecosystem approach where they've split the state into districts, and they've hired an ecosystem coordinator for workforce in each one of them. So that's an interesting take that I think other states around the country should take a look at. Of course, in the AMCC update, we have a long list of federal grant opportunities that David curates. So thank you, David Van Sicklen. If you don't know David, you should. He's an exceptional operations director for AMCC and a great teammate. So we also have a very useful weekly list of articles and reports, webinars, things that we think apply closely to your work. And from this week, for example, there's a showcase DOE webinar on additive manufacturing and commercialization that's coming on June 13th at 3 p.m. So that's one example, but there's many, many examples in there. And of course, a lot of federal grant opportunities also. So that's a quick run through the AMCC update. There's a lot more. Again, if you haven't put your name and affiliation in chat, please do that. Today, we're going to now move to talking about an important part of our energy transition with senior advisor from the Department of Treasury. Those of you who know me well know that our energy transition is close to my original silo of professional experience as an environmental policy official. And depending on how you count it, manufacturing and industry is approximately a third of our greenhouse gas pollution problem. And compared to energy production and transportation, we're not making the kind of pollution reduction progress we need to, which is pretty lame. We totally can. That's the cool part. And that's what's cool about Rachel coming on here. We can help our manufacturers upgrade their gear, make more money, employ a more diverse workforce, lift regions across the country. That's all good news. And additional good news is we have some serious incentives that can help do that. And that's why we're excited about having a Department of Treasury Senior Advisor, Rachel McCleary, on here, leading external stakeholder outreach for the Inflation Reduction Act to talk about a couple of very cool tax credits for manufacturers. So Rachel, welcome. Rachel was with us in Michigan doing a workshop for manufacturers there. Did a fabulous job. So of course, in AMCC fashion, we nimbly pivoted to invite her, and she was great to say yes. So thanks for being on, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Matt, and hi, everyone. Just give me 1 second while I share my screen and get situated here. Can you guys see that okay?
Looks
All
good.
right, let's get into presentation mode. All right, shoot, hold on. Sorry, guys, just bear with me here.
No worries. No worries. We've got lots to talk about, Rachel. Bernie Lynch, good to see you on. If you don't know Bernie, she's got a really interesting project around minerals, crossing, I don't know, what is it, Bernie? Like 6 states?
Okay, so just for the interest of the operations on my end, is it okay if we just keep the slides here? Can you guys see these okay? If I get into presentation mode, my monitors kind of get all sideways. Apologies.
Totally cool. Yeah.
So thank you, Matt. Thank you so much to the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative for inviting me to speak with you all about clean energy manufacturing tax credits that are made available through the Inflation Reduction Act. As Matt mentioned, I'm Rachel McCleary. I'm a senior advisor in the IRA program office. And in that role, I'm responsible for overseeing the law's roughly 24 new and modified clean energy tax credits included in this historic climate law. The IRA program office was established in 2023 in response to the Inflation Reduction Act passing in August of 2022. And my office is focused on the advocacy, delivery, and programmatic success of the IRA's clean energy tax credits as regulatory clarity is provided. I will say, while the IRA tax credits span multiple industries and multiple different workers and manufacturers, the manufacturing and vehicle tax credits in particular are very close to my heart. Before I was at Treasury, I was in Ford Motor Company's Washington, D.C. office, leading U.S. manufacturing policy, labor, and critical mineral policy for the company. Prior to that, I was on the Senate Finance Committee, focusing on, as the Chief Communications Advisor on tax and oversight. But I also started my career in the offices of John Dingell and Debbie Stabenow in a variety of press and policy roles. So I know there were a few Michigan mentions at the top. I figured I would kind of bring it all full circle by sharing a little bit more about where I came from prior to supporting the implementation of these credits. So just a couple of very brief disclaimers. The slides that I'll be talking through today, most of them provide an overview of certain IRA tax provisions for general informational purposes only. This is not itself tax guidance, and the content in the presentation is based on proposed regulations and other tax information on irs.gov. One of the credits I'll be talking about today is still a proposed rule. Treasury and the IRS will carefully consider feedback submitted during the public comment periods for that proposed reg before issuing a final rule. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the IRA. For those who are not, it does make the largest investment in clean energy in U.S. history. And the bulk of the IRA investments flow through the tax code instead of direct government spending. So Matt had mentioned all the grant programs that populate AMCC's newsletter. That funding is wonderful. It's important to have upfront funding for manufacturers, but what I'll be talking about today is explicitly about tax incentives. And just like you would file something on your own personal tax return, the project, the action needs to be complete before filing, before trying to claim that credit with the IRS. So when we think about tax incentives, think about this being a back-end payment. We're really encouraging manufacturers and others to factor all of this in through their own financing stack. And that's why having knowledge about the grant and loan programs and tax incentives are so important, because there are certain rules that will allow the stacking of those certain federal funds depending on the credit in the program. But under the Biden-Harris administration, private companies have announced commitments to invest over $173 billion in electric vehicle and battery manufacturing, $77 billion in clean energy manufacturing, and $155 billion in clean power projects. That is, by any means, a decent amount of money. And what we're finding since the beginning of this administration is that the IRA really is a major driver of the boom in these clean energy manufacturing investments. It's creating jobs, saving consumers money, and accelerating the nation's transition to clean energy. And more importantly, and certainly of interest to many of you on this call, it's going to reduce volatility in the cost of energy and increase our nation's energy independence. And that, of course, is fundamental to our manufacturers, certainly here in the US, as we want them to keep growing and evolving with this change in energy usage. I like sharing this slide, this quote from Secretary Yellen, because it focuses on not just the funding of where all this money is coming from private investments, but it's also noting that these investments are spanning across multiple industries and being invested in areas that have historically been left behind. So a Treasury economic policy report found that late last year, 75% of clean investments made because of the IRA were going to economically disadvantaged counties. So how do we qualify that? Those are qualities with below average wages, incomes, employment rates, college graduation rates. Prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, that rate of private investment to location was at 68%. So this presents an incredible opportunity for workers, for manufacturers, for communities that have been left behind with previous energy transitions. that suffer from, areas that have the highest amount of pollution too. So as we think about investment, the IRA program office is really focused on making it a holistic message, right? This is good for US manufacturers, it's good for US workers, it's good for our communities, especially as we see this trend, right, of where these big clean energy projects are being built, where the work is going to be done. It just creates an incredible amount of opportunity for many of you who are on the call and those in your network. So many of you are likely familiar with the production and investment tax credits. Those are included in the Inflation Reduction Act, and they are extended through at least 2032. Prior to the IRA, they were extended in fits and starts. So we're hoping that this decade of stability will increase uptake of those significant credits. But there are also two specific tax credits just for manufacturers and that are really focused on supply chain development. And that's what I'll be spending just a few minutes talking with you all today about. So first, there's the Qualifying Advanced Energy Project Investment Tax Credit. I realize that is a mouthful. We refer to that in shorthand at Treasury as the 48C program. This program provides an allocated investment tax credit for investments in advanced energy projects that expand clean energy manufacturing and recycling and critical materials refining, processing, recycling, and for projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions at industrial facilities. And I'll talk in just a minute about what that allocated piece means and why it's relevant here. And then I'll also be talking briefly about the Advanced Manufacturing Production Tax Credit, known shorthand at Treasury as 45X. Now, this provides tax credits for the production and sale of certain eligible components that support the clean energy supply chain. In the case of 45X, definitions and eligible components include solar and wind energy components, inverters, qualifying battery components, and applicable critical minerals. And I have a ton of additional resources that outline just what all of those eligible components are that I'd be happy to send to Matt and David so that you all have additional information if you'd like to dig in a little bit deeper. Importantly, these two components that were made at a facility that claimed the 48C credit are not eligible for the 45X credit. Both of these programs are meant to move in parallel with one another, but they cannot be stacked. So I'll go just provide a brief overview of 48C and maybe some history too that I know Matt and others on this call are aware of. 48C is not a new program. It's considered one of the modified programs in the Inflation Reduction Act. This was actually signed into law by President Obama as a part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. And at the time, it was the first of its kind 30% investment tax credit for facilities, which at the time included $2.3 billion to provide incentives to build, re-equip, or expand the facilities necessary to produce an entirely new generation of energy technology. So this was extremely important back in 2009 when the industry was going through, when the auto industry in particular was going through quite a bit of change, but it was also eligible for a wide variety of other industries too. Fast forward to 2021, certainly everybody on this call was very aware of the challenges of the post-pandemic recovery, inflation, an energy security crisis abroad, and certainly a supply chain crisis in trying to get materials where they needed to be on time. So in light of all of this, President Biden and Congress turned again to this credit as a mechanism to really focus investment on clean energy manufacturing and the facilities that shore up and onshore these high quality supply chains and good paying jobs. So what did Congress do? They took 48C and they expanded it with a $10 billion investment. And again, that's to re-equip facilities that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions and that are supporting the production of critical minerals, materials, refining, processing, and recycling, along with other clean energy production actions that I mentioned at the top. Importantly, of the total $10 billion available, at least $4 billion must go to projects in communities with closed coal mines or retired coal-fired power plants. There's more information on where to find those geographies on DOE's website. We kicked off the first round of allocation last year. So the 48C program with its $10 billion is already halfway through. We received initial submissions, also known as concept papers, that sought a total of nearly $42 billion of funding. At the time, we only had $4 billion available. So I think that demand just shows how significant this credit is, the demand of manufacturers to get a piece of that to support their investments. But unfortunately, because it's an allocated credit, that means it's competitive. And again, there are limited funds available. Now, the $4 billion in awards were allocated earlier this year, with concept papers for the remaining $6 billion due on Friday, June 21st. That is coming up very quickly. Just to kind of level set the concept paper process, first, as you'll see on my slide, DOE has a very helpful, very useful website that has links to resources, recordings, materials for everything you need to know about how to compete for this tax credit. The concept paper portion is the initial stage. So after concept papers are submitted, IRS and the DOE working together determine out of those concept papers which should move forward to submit a full application. So
And Rachel, those are only four pages long, right? Those concept papers,
very
right?
brief.
And
that's right.
And the reason I'm chiming in is because we have 3 minutes left, and I want to make sure that you can emphasize the point about 45X that I didn't understand that it is not capped.
Yes.
And so that's a super important point that folks need to understand, to distribute to your networks. And Rachel, thanks in advance for sending us, this information that we'll distribute, and also additional, more specific information. So back to you.
Yeah, and this is my last slide here, so I'll be pretty brief on 45X. As Matt said, this is not a competitive tax credit. This credit provides a production tax credit for domestic manufacturing of certain components within the clean energy supply chain, and I had mentioned a list of those at the top. Now, this is a per unit tax credit that is uncapped, it's refundable, and it's for each clean energy component domestically produced and sold by a manufacturer. And this credit is also eligible for the IRA's novel monetization provisions, elective pay and transferability. For those of you who are from state governments or economic developers on the call, it's eligible for both. So this credit is particularly powerful for amplifying investments in the clean energy space among small and startup businesses, state and local governments, and others. So it's really wide, it's very vast. In many cases, the credit varies by eligible component and is multiplied by the number of units produced by the taxpayer per year. So again, I have more detailed information about what that looks like, but when we think about a per unit tax credit for the number of units, this gets fairly lucrative fairly fast. And so it really is the anchor for that supply chain onshoring goal within the Inflation Reduction Act. And we do have, in addition to materials that I had mentioned I can send to Matt, a lot of other public-facing materials that are available on irs.gov, treasury.gov. The White House also has an IRA guidebook. And as I had mentioned, for all things 48C, that's the competitive program with concept papers due at the end of this month. A lot of really helpful resources available on DOE's website. So we can be sure to get a link out to you all if you'd like to dig in any further on either one of these manufacturing credits. So with that, Matt, I'll thank you again for your time. Thank you all for being on the call, and I will turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for being so nimble to respond so quickly in less than a week to rally to do this. And like I said, thanks in advance for sending us more detailed information so that we can pass that along this week to our AMCC network. Can you drop your email in chat? People, that can be helpful.
Sure thing.
That would be awesome. We have 1 minute left. We keep this to 30 minutes, right? Because we have so many busy stakeholders across the country. That's been part of the successful formula over the years to keep it right at 30 minutes. So we appreciate you, Rachel, for your good work. Thanks for your service, and thank everyone for your service across the country, doing the good hard work that we know needs to get done. So until next week at this time, we'll be in touch on the AMCC update, and you can always reach out to David and I. You know where to find us. Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.